In 1938, in the small town of London, Texas. Yes, exactly right. London in Texas. A married couple named Han were walking along the steep bank of a river and stumbled upon a strange stone. A piece of wood was sticking out of a block of sandstone, what seemed to be an ordinary stick grown into the rock. They took the stone home as a souvenir and placed it on their mantelpiece, where it sat for nearly 10 years. No one paid any attention to it until 1947, when the family's son decided to crack the block open. Inside was something that made him go cold. A wooden handle, tightly embedded in the stone, transitioned into a metal rod, perfectly formed and clearly man-made. It was a hammer. A common hammer at first glance, with a wooden handle and an iron head. But it was encased inside rock, which, according to initial estimates, was between 100,000 and 300,000 years old. This was impossible. Humans did not make iron hammers 300,000 years ago. Humans did not process metal at all 300,000 years ago. 300,000 years ago, Neanderthals lived on Earth, barely capable of chipping stones. And yet, here was a hammer, entombed in ancient rock as if someone had forgotten it there long before our civilization was born. This find, dubbed the London Hammer, became one of the most famous and controversial artifacts in the world. It spawned dozens of books, hundreds of articles, and millions of views on YouTube. Some see it as evidence of an ancient, highly developed civilization, others as evidence of alien visits, and others as simply a dating error. But before we figure out who is right, let us talk about a broader phenomenon, because the London Hammer is far from the only impossible artifact discovered in the last 200 years. There are dozens of them, and each one presents science with the same uncomfortable question. What if we do not know something about our own past? Let us start with artifacts found in places where they should not be, so-called out-of-place artifacts, or in scientific jargon, OOPArts. This term was introduced by American naturalist Ivan Sanderson in the 1960s. Since then, it has firmly entered the lexicon of both alternative history proponents and skeptics. An OOPArt is any object discovered in a geological or archaeological context that contradicts accepted chronology. An iron nail inside a piece of coal, a gold chain in a carboniferous stratum, a concrete wall at a depth of 100 meters underground. Every such find is like a splinter in the finger of academic science. Not fatal, but impossible to ignore. Let us return to the London Hammer and break it down piece by piece, literally. What we know for sure is that the hammer is real. It exists. It can be seen and touched in the Museum of Creation Evidence in Glen Rose, Texas. This is a small private museum founded by creationist Carl Ball, who uses the hammer as proof that the Earth is not billions of years old, but only a few thousand. But more on that later. The hammer itself is about 15 centimeters long. The metal head is about 6 centimeters in diameter. The wooden handle has partially petrified, indicating a long stay in a mineral environment. According to analysis results, the metal part consists of approximately 96% iron, 2.5% chlorine, and less than 1% sulfur. This is an unusual composition. Chlorine in such quantities is not found in modern alloys. And this is precisely what gave rise to the most fantastic interpretations. Proponents of the ancient civilization version point to several facts. First, the hammer was inside rock estimated to be hundreds of thousands of years old. This means the hammer is at least as old. Second, the composition of the metal does not correspond to any known modern alloy. This means it was created by a technology we do not know. Third, the wooden handle has partially turned into coal, which indicates extreme age. Conclusion: someone manufactured an iron hammer hundreds of thousands of years ago when, according to the official version, there were no creatures on Earth capable of processing metal. Sounds convincing? At first glance, yes. But let us see what the other side says. Skeptics, including practically all professional geologists and archaeologists, put forward counter-arguments that are no less compelling. The main one concerns the rock itself. The fact is that the age of the stone and the age of the object inside it are not the same thing. Geologists are well aware of a process where mineralized water seeps through the ground and forms a hard shell of sandstone or limestone around any object. This is called a concretion. An object can be relatively new, say 100 or 200 years old. But if it ends up in a suitable geological environment, a stone shell can form around it in a few decades, outwardly indistinguishable from rock millions of years old. In other words, the stone around the hammer may be ancient, but that does not mean the hammer was encased in it 300,000 years ago. It could have fallen into a crack, been covered by sediment, and grown a mineral crust in a quite foreseeable time frame. There are other problems too. The hammer was not found during professional excavations. It was picked up on a riverbank by a married couple, without witnesses, without recording the stratigraphic context, and without in-situ photographs. In archaeology, context is everything. An object ripped from its context loses 90% of its informational value. We do not know at what depth it lay, in exactly which layer of rock, or near what other objects. We only know that someone found a stone with a sticking-out handle and brought it home. This is not a scientific discovery. It is a chance find whose interpretation depends on who is looking at it. As for the metal composition, the high chlorine content is indeed unusual, but not inexplicable. Chlorine could have entered the iron from the environment, from salt water, or from minerals in the rock. Corrosion in a chlorine-rich environment can change the chemical composition of metal beyond recognition over several centuries. A geochemist will tell you that a hammer lying for 100 to 200 years in the mineralized soil of Texas could easily acquire exactly such a composition. Now for the most interesting part. Stylistically, the hammer completely corresponds to the tools of American miners and farmers from the mid to late 19th century. Its shape, size, and the proportions of the head and handle are all typical of hand tools of that period. In the 19th century, minerals were actively mined in Texas, and miners constantly lost tools in karst cracks, on eroded riverbanks, and in abandoned shafts. A hammer lost in 1850 that fell into a crack in limestone rock could easily grow a mineral crust over 150 years and look as if it were originally encased in the stone. But, and this is an important but, the skeptical version is also not definitively proven. No one has conducted a full radiocarbon analysis of the wooden handle. No one has studied the rock around the hammer using methods that would allow us to determine exactly whether the stone shell formed around the hammer or if the hammer was originally inside the rock. Carl Baugh, the museum owner, does not allow independent researchers access to the artifact, which naturally fuels suspicion on both sides. Skeptics say he hides the hammer because he fears exposure, while alternative history proponents say official science fears the truth. As a result, the London hammer remains in limbo, unproven and unrefuted, an ideal artifact for debates that will never end. But the London hammer is just the tip of the iceberg. Let us go deeper, quite literally. In 1885, in a coal mine in the Austrian town of Schöndorf, an object was discovered that became known as the Salzburg Parallel-epiped. A worker cracking open a piece of brown coal from the Tertiary period, which is between 2 and 65 million years old, found inside a small metal object of almost perfect cubic shape with a deep groove around its perimeter. The object weighed about 700 grams, and according to analysis results, was made of iron with a mixture of nickel and carbon. The find caused a sensation. A metal cube inside a piece of coal that is millions of years old was even more impossible than a hammer in sandstone. Austrian scientists studied the object, published articles, and opinions were divided. Some considered it a meteorite. Iron-nickel meteorites can indeed have unusual shapes. Others pointed to the groove around the perimeter, which was too regular for a natural formation, and insisted on a man-made origin. The object was exhibited in the Linz Museum, then disappeared from the exhibit and was considered lost for a long time. Later, it was found in storage and re-examined. It turned out to be, most likely, a cast-iron counterweight from 19th century mining equipment that accidentally fell into a coal seam during mine development. Well, the original version of a million-year-old artifact had already spread across the world and continues to live on in books and on websites unburdened by scientific verification. The story of the Salzburg Parallel-epiped illustrates an important principle. Impossible artifacts often turn out to be the result of contamination, modern objects getting into ancient geological layers. Mines, quarries, and construction pits are all places where rock layers are disturbed and mixed, and an object from one century can easily end up in the rock of another. Archaeologists call this intrusion. A modern object is embedded in an ancient context, and if the observer does not record the process of embedding, they may take the result for an anomaly. But there are artifacts that are not so easily explained by contamination. One of the most mysterious is the Antikythera mechanism. In 1901, Greek sponge divers discovered the remains of an ancient Roman ship near the island of Antikythera, which had sunk around 70 BC. Among amphorae, statues, and coins, they brought to the surface a greenish piece of bronze covered in corrosion. At first, no one paid any attention to it, just another fragment. But when scientists began to clean it, they discovered a system of more than 30 bronze gears inside, precisely fitted to one another. It was a mechanism, complex and multi-staged, created with a precision thought impossible for antiquity. It took over 100 years to decipher the Antikythera mechanism. Using X-ray tomography and computer modeling, scientists established that it was an analog computer designed to calculate the positions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets known in that era. It could predict solar and lunar eclipses, track the Olympic cycle, and even account for the irregularity of the lunar orbit. Nothing similar in complexity appeared in Europe until the 15th century, 1,600 years later. The Antikythera mechanism is not an impossible artifact in the sense that the London hammer is. Its age is not disputed. Its origin is understood. Ancient Greece, roughly 2nd century BC. But it is impossible in another sense. It demonstrates a level of technological development that, according to generally accepted views, should not have existed in that era. This makes one wonder how much more knowledge and technology was lost through centuries of dark ages, invasions, and fires. The Antikythera mechanism is a perfect illustration of one important idea. Technological progress is not linear. We are used to thinking that humanity moves from the simple to the complex, from a stone axe to a smartphone in a straight upward line. But real history looks different. Civilizations arise, reach a peak, and then collapse, and with them, knowledge, technology, and skills disappear. The Romans knew how to build concrete domes that stand for 2,000 years. After the fall of Rome, this secret was lost for centuries. The ancient Egyptians possessed stoneworking techniques that we still do not fully understand today. Damascus steel, Greek fire, the Antikythera mechanism, these are all technologies that were created, used, and lost. But between a lost technology and a 300,000-year-old civilization lies a vast chasm. The Antikythera mechanism is amazing, but it does not violate the laws of physics or contradict the basics of chronology. It shows that the ancient Greeks were smarter than we thought, but not that an unknown civilization existed on Earth hundreds of thousands of years before our era. Such a claim requires entirely different evidence. However, there are other mysteries that are not so easily dismissed. In South Africa, in mines near the town of Ottosdal, miners have for decades been finding strange metal spheres in layers of pyrophyllite, a rock estimated to be about 2.8 billion years old. The spheres, ranging from 2.5 to 10 centimeters in diameter, had perfectly smooth surfaces, and some had thin parallel grooves around the equator, as if made on a lathe. Photographs of these spheres traveled the world, and versions multiplied, from petrified alien eggs to proof of a civilization 3 billion years old that preceded ours. The reality, as always, turned out to be more mundane. Geologists established that the spheres are natural concretions formed as a result of mineral precipitation around a crystallization center. The parallel grooves are traces of layering of minerals of different compositions. Nature can create forms of striking regularity without any involvement of intelligence. Snowflakes, crystals, basalt columns, and the South African spheres have joined this list. Or take the mysterious Baghdad Batteries, clay vessels with copper cylinders and iron rods inside, found in Iraq and dated to the Parthian period, which is about 2,000 years ago. When an acidic solution, such as vinegar or grape juice, was poured into the vessel, a potential difference arose between the copper and the iron. The device worked as a primitive galvanic battery. Why did the ancient Parthians need electricity? One version is for the electrolytic gilding of jewelry. Another is that they were not batteries at all, but vessels for storing sacred scrolls, and the electrical effect was just a random coincidence. The dispute remains unresolved to this day, and the Baghdad Batteries remain one of the most intriguing artifacts on the border between the impossible and the improbable. And here we come to the most interesting question. What if such evidence exists? What if impossible artifacts are not dating errors or contamination, but real traces of something we do not know? Proponents of this idea, including people with academic degrees, build their argument on a simple statistical observation. There are too many impossible artifacts for all of them to be errors. Dozens of metal objects in coal seams, strange imprints in rock, unexplained structures. If each case individually can be explained by contamination or error, then the sum of the cases, they argue, points to a pattern. It is as if you found one coin on the ocean floor, a fluke, 10 coins, a coincidence, 100 coins, a shipwreck. The question is whether enough coins have been collected to see the ship. Critics rightly answer, no, not enough, and here is why. First, most impossible artifacts were found in the 19th or early 20th century, when standards of scientific recording were far from modern. No one photographed the find in situ, no one took samples of the surrounding rock, and no one invited independent experts. We are dealing with stories, often retold through third parties, rather than scientific data. Second, there is a powerful selection effect. Books are written and films are made about impossible artifacts, but not about the thousands of cases where the mystery was solved and turned out to be mundane. No one will watch a 2-hour film titled, "It Turned Out to Be an Ordinary 19th Century Hammer," but a film titled, "Artifact 300,000 Years Old" will gather millions of views. This bias creates the illusion that there are more impossible artifacts than there actually are. Third, and perhaps the strongest argument of skeptics, if a technologically developed civilization had existed on Earth 300,000 years ago, it would have left more than one hammer. It would have left millions of traces, building foundations, mining waste heaps, chemical soil contamination, and changes in atmospheric composition readable in ice cores. Modern civilization has existed for only a few thousand years, and its traces are visible everywhere, from microplastics in ocean depths to radioactive isotopes in Antarctic glaciers. A civilization existing hundreds of thousands of years ago would have left an analogous or even more powerful geological trace. We do not see it in rocks, ice cores, or ocean sediments. One hammer is an anomaly. The absence of everything else is a refutation. But there is a group of scientists who propose an elegant way out of this impasse. They do not claim there was a civilization on Earth 300,000 years ago. They ask another question: would we be able to detect it if it had been there? In 2018, astrophysicist Gavin Schmidt and astrobiologist Adam Frank published a scientific article titled The Silurian Hypothesis, named after a fictional race of reptilians from the TV series Doctor Who. In it, they raised a question. Suppose an industrial civilization existed on Earth millions of years before humans appeared. What traces would it leave in the geological record? The answer was unexpected. Almost none. After 10 million years, even concrete buildings would have turned to dust. Plastic would have decomposed, and metals would have oxidized and dissolved into the rock. The only thing that could survive are anomalies in the chemical composition of sedimentary rocks, a spike in carbon from burning fossil fuels, traces of synthetic chemicals, and changes in isotope ratios. It is precisely such anomalies, not hammers and nails, that need to be sought if we want to test the hypothesis of a Precambrian civilization. The Silurian hypothesis is not a claim that such a civilization existed. It is a methodological exercise. Scientists ask if we are looking correctly, and the answer is no, not exactly. Our geology is focused on finding fossils and minerals, not on finding traces of industrial activity in the deep past. Perhaps these traces exist, but we simply do not know how to recognize them or are not looking in the right places. All this brings us back to the London hammer and similar artifacts. Are they proof of an ancient civilization? Almost certainly not. Are they interesting mysteries? Undoubtedly. Are they a reason to ask the right questions? Absolutely. Because the true value of impossible artifacts is not in the artifacts themselves. It is that they make us think about the limits of our knowledge. We live on a planet that is 4.5 billion years old. Our civilization has existed for a few thousand years. That is a blink of an eye on a geological timescale. We have studied a tiny fraction of the Earth's crust, a tiny fraction of the ocean floor, and a tiny fraction of the ice cores. To claim that we know everything about the past of our planet is an arrogance that science cannot afford. The hammer from London, Texas, most likely belonged to some 19th century miner or farmer. It fell into a crack, grew a mineral crust, and was found 100 years later by a couple walking along a riverbank. This is the simplest explanation, and by the principle of Occam's razor, the most likely. But, and this is important, this explanation is not proven. It is not verified. The hammer has never been subjected to a full independent study. And as long as that is true, it will remain what it has been for the last 80 years, a perfect screen onto which everyone projects their beliefs. Creationists see proof of a young Earth. Alternative history enthusiasts see a trace of an ancient civilization. Skeptics see an ordinary hammer in an unusual wrapper, and scientists see a reminder that even the simplest things can turn out to be more complicated than they seem. Ultimately, the story of impossible artifacts is a story about ourselves, about our need to believe in a miracle, about our fear of the unknown, and about our desire to know that we are not the first intelligent beings on this planet, that someone was here before us, and that we are not alone in the abyss of time. The hammer in the stone is not an answer. It is a question. And maybe that is exactly why it fascinates us so much. Not because we know who created it, but because we do not know. And maybe we will never know. But you know what the most ironic part of this whole story is? If someday, in millions of years, another civilization excavates the remains of ours, they will find billions of artifacts, plastic bottles, concrete foundations, nuclear waste, and satellites in orbit. They will have no doubt that we existed. But if there was another civilization before us without plastic, without nuclear energy, and without concrete, what could have remained of it? Maybe only one hammer in a stone on the bank of a Texas river? One tiny, unconvincing, controversial trace that we found and could not decipher. It is precisely this thought, not a proof but a thought, that makes impossible artifacts so irresistible. They remind us that 4.5 billion years is a very, very long time, and that our knowledge of this time is a thin, fragile film on the surface of the abyss.